Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's wonderful to be back here at FICCI, and it's wonderful to be in conversation with pretty much the who's who of the government of India, secretaries who are looking after large chunks of the sectors that move the economy. Without further ado, let me introduce you to the secretaries here this evening before we get into the conversation. I'll start with my left, Ms. Rachna Shah, Secretary of the Textile Ministry. Thank you very, very much for being here with us. Mr. S. Krishnan, Secretary at MEITY. Mr. Krishnan, always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us. Mr. Ajay, Secretary of the Economic Affairs at the Finance Ministry. Mr. Seth, it's a pleasure to have you here with us. And Mr. Poundrik, the Secretary at the Ministry of Steel. Mr. Poundrik, many, many thanks for joining us. We are, of course, awaiting Mr. Rajesh Kumar Singh, the Secretary of the Defence Ministry, and he should be here shortly. It is almost the end of this calendar year, and as we kickstart the next financial year as well as the next calendar year, it is time to take stock of the year that's gone by as well as understand what the government intends to prioritize for the new year. A lot has been spoken of in terms of measures that have been taken forward, measures that were unveiled in the budget, but more importantly, we are now dealing with a geopolitical mix which appears to be far more challenging than at the start of the year. There are many imponderables at the moment. We also have a change in the White House, and of course the expectations on what the Trump administration is likely to do by way of tariffs, what happens with the Fed, what happens with interest rates in the US, all of those will have implications and an impact as far as the global economy is concerned, including for us here in India. I'd like to welcome the Secretary of the Defence Ministry, Mr. Rajesh Singh, to join us on this panel as well. Thank you very much, sir, for being here this evening. So without further ado, let's kickstart the conversation with taking stock with where we find ourselves as far as the economy is concerned. And I'll give the Economic Affairs Secretary the first go. Mr. Seth, many, many thanks again. Let me start by asking you for your own assessment of the health and the strength of the Indian economy at this point in time. A, how concerned are you as far as inflation goes? And B, what is the outlook now as far as interest rates go, given the fact that inflation is still running at 6% above the RBI's comfort level? What's the expectation that the government has on both inflation as well as interest rates? Your view.
Actually, this is saying that after we are all here, the format has changed. So instead of being a conversation or having a view on what Mr. Shah and Mrs. Vish had set it for us, as the format has changed, let me attempt to the question which you have asked. We started the year with estimates in the economic survey is 6.5% to 7% growth. And I see that we are still very much in that zone. And I don't see any significant downside risk coming to that. What I see that several of you have been talking about, informed people have been talking about, is there any apparent slowdown? Yes, the numbers in the second quarter does show that some of the products or some of the services may not be at the same level where they were, say, about a year back or even in, say, 2 quarters earlier. But thereafter, if you look at some other indicators, especially I'm looking at in terms of the e-way bills or the e-invoices, especially in the month of October, they tell a different number. That does not indicate that we have any significant possibility of any downside risk from 6.5% to 7% growth, which has been estimated at the beginning of the year. Of course, it can be, well, it is going to be closer to 6.5, it will be closer to 7. That I would not like to venture into that. As far as inflation is concerned, yes, food prices has been a problem area, and this has been largely because of the extreme continuing rainfall, unusually long when it has continued this year. But other than the food prices, inflation is not a challenge. As far as interest rate in the economy is concerned, I would rather not get into that. That is a monetary policy action, which with the full information, the central bank will take a view on that.
Thank you for giving us your view on inflation, interest rates, as well as the economy. And as you pointed out, you don't believe that there is a downside risk to the growth assessment that was put forward in the budget. But, sir, if I may, ask you about where things stand as far as CapEx is concerned. And there was a slowdown, partly on account of the elections. But what's the sense that you get today in terms of undershooting on the CapEx targets that the government has set out? And more importantly, do you expect a significant pickup from here on?
See, on that aspect, that last year the capital expenditure by Government of India was 9.5 lakh crore. This year it was budgeted about 11.1, and there may be some undershooting, but I do expect that will be a significant increase over last year. So while some sectors are a bit slow, but on the other hand, a few other sectors, there are additional demands coming up. So I don't see that as a major issue coming up. Like even last year, it was budgeted for 10, expenditure was about 95%. So I see even this year also we should be around the same percentage points.
Okay, so you believe that you will be able to make up for what we have lost on account of the elections and so on and so forth. Before I get the other secretaries in, one quick clarification that we would like from you. So there's been a lot of talk about the fact that the government is likely to bring in approvals from the cabinet as far as ELI schemes are concerned. Now, are these separate from what was already announced in the budget? And do you believe that this is something new that we're talking about?
See, as you are aware that once the schemes gets announced, a new initiative gets announced, and then go to the process of a detailed formulation and then the appraisal, then they move to the cabinet, which is the competent authority for approval.
What was already
These
announced.
Are the ones, the 5 schemes which were announced as part of the PM package, and a number of them are ready. And as far as internship scheme is there, that is already approved at an appropriate level as a pilot scheme to be done this year. So these are the same schemes which are getting approved.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you very much for that clarification, because there was confusion on whether there were some new schemes that the government was at this point in time looking at. Let me get the Secretary of Defence into the conversation. Mr. Singh, many thanks. You know, there's been a lot of enthusiasm as well as a lot of confidence expressed with the Defence Ministry's indigenization list. We've seen 5 of those as far as the recent past is concerned. What should the expectation be from here on, sir? And if you can give us a status check of where things currently stand in terms of the kind of cost savings we've accrued because of the import substitution done.
Yeah, thank you for that. Happy to join you here today. I would say that the defense industry in this country is at an inflection point. It's reached a kind of a critical mass where we now have significant volumes being produced indigenously. The value of production in this country has gone up by 3 times over the last 10 years or so. Exports have gone up by 31 times. And our focus increasingly has been on ensuring that we spend our capex within this country. The ratio we originally set out 3 years back was about 60% to be spent within India, 40% outside. The ratio for the current year has now been enhanced further to 75%. And we intend to double down on that indigenization exercise that we are doing. In some ways, it's a painful process because obviously, in some ways it is easier to simply buy things abroad, looking at the best, looking at the brochures, taking out the best set of capabilities that you want and try to get that. But in the long run, it detracts from your strategic autonomy. It detracts from your ability to withstand supply chain shocks, some of which we are actually facing today in the context of some of our systems. I mean, it's not a secret that the S-400, for example, is delayed. We've got 3 batteries, 2 more are delayed because of the conflicts that are ongoing. So yeah, there is a strong strategic case for going indigenous, and we intend to double down there. Our top priority will be on what we call IDDM, which is indigenously designed, developed and manufactured. That will be the sort of strand of our procurement process which we will focus on. And some of these are in areas where DRDO has developed technologies. In artillery, you'll probably see some cases where DRDO technology, private partners will come in and we'll be manufacturing that equipment at scale. The C295 model, where we have Airbus coming in along with a private sector partner, is another sort of fairly strong sort of template, and we could probably do a few more of those. In time, the intention is to increasingly bring in the private sector. Right now, in the domestic value that we produce, about 70% is by our 16 public sector undertakings, 9 of which are new from the ordnance factories, corporatized. Others are the older ones. The intention is increasingly to make it about closer to 50-50, and I'm sure the private sector is going to step up in that direction. So yes, exciting times are ahead, and this is one sector where there will be a lot of expenditure happening, about $20 to $25 billion per year over the next 10 years. So certainly this is an area where if you're there in this play, you will get a lot of growth.
Sir, I just want you to comment on a point that was made by Uday Kotak in an interview with me a couple of days ago, where he said that in the new era that we live in, India must exercise its military power, and hence we must spend much more as a percentage of our GDP on defense. Do you believe that that is something that the government is considering at this point in time, significant allocation, higher allocation as far as defense is concerned, especially as you talk about the changing geopolitics as well?
Well, I agree with some of what he said, but the point is that what we have right now is about 2% of our GDP is spent on defense expenditure. Now, 2% of 4 trillion is very different from, say, 2.5% of 1.5 or 1.75 trillion about 10 years back. So I don't think resources have ever been a constraint, and I'm taking the liberty of similar sort of accommodation by the Finance Secretary in the future as well. Our expectation is, frankly, that we will meet our whatever are the requirement of our services. We should be able to meet quite easily with a normal increase in our budgetary outlay. In fact, often it is difficult to fully exhaust that budgetary outlay precisely because of the hard road that I mentioned, which is indigenization, and also some of the supply chain issues that are afflicting suppliers worldwide also, which means that a lot of your contract fulfillment timelines keep getting stretched. But nonetheless, as I said, even if we maintain it at 2% of our GDP, as we grow at 7%, we should be comfortably able to meet the requirements of our armed forces.
Let me get the Steel Secretary into the conversation as well. I want to understand from you what the outlook is as far as demand is concerned, and specifically I want to address concerns that are being raised by Indian industry. Sajjan Jindal, in a conversation with us, has very clearly said that there is a need for the government to impose higher tariffs, higher duties, especially on imports coming in from China. What is the government's view? Do you believe that there is a legitimate case at this point in time to impose higher tariffs? And if that were to happen, what is the impact and the implication on the consuming industry? Because you will have to find that balance.
Thank you. I will start with the consumption side. So, as we know that right now the per capita consumption in India is about approaching 100 kgs per person per. Now, if we see at the historical data, this is an inflection point as far as steel is concerned, and what has been seen is that as soon as countries reach about 100, their growth increases significantly, and that is already into picture, because this first half of 24-25 we have seen a growth of about 13% in steel consumption. So yes, on the demand side I don't see any problem. In fact, if this growth continues with, again I will refer to the Finance Secretary who mentioned about 10 lakh crores. So government push in infrastructure, public demand, public spending, we will need about 300 million tons of capacity by 2030, which is at present at 180 million tons of capacity. So that means 120 million tons of additional capacity, which means approximate investment of $120 billion, which is 10 lakh crores in Indian rupees. And if that investment has to come, so I'm migrating to your second question. So if that investment has to come, then our industry has to have that kind of profitability that they are able to make that investment. Now, if that will not happen, then probably by 2030, we will become a net steel importer if our demand continues to rise and our production does not increase. Coming to the issue of profitability, so yes, there have been concerns in last almost a year, and especially in last few months, 6 months, that dumping is happening at the international level and steel prices have come down. In fact, the Indian imports for first half of this financial year have increased by roughly 41%, and exports have gone down by 36%. So that's a valid argument of the industry that steel prices are depressed. Inventory levels in steel companies have increased from normal 15 days, 16 days, they have increased up to 30 days. So there is a genuine problem and we are aware about that. So there are multiple ways of trying to protect the domestic industry. One of that is increasing the basic custom duty. The only problem is that 62% of our imports are from FTA countries. So if we increase basic custom duty, there is no impact on these 62% imports because there is no duty. The second option is safeguard duty, for which industry will have to approach the DGTR.
Haven't they done that already?
I don't think so. I don't know whether if any steel manufacturer is here, but they are, I think, preparing to do that. And third is anti-dumping, which again has a process. So the later two have processes which the industry has to take on their own and approach the DGTR. The first one has its own limitations because majority of imports will not be covered by BCD.
So you're saying that at this point in time, even if you were to bring in higher tariffs, it may not have the necessary impact because it's coming via the FTA route?
Yeah, so it will have impact only on 40% or roughly 38% of the imports, not on the majority of the imports.
So is it an active consideration at this point in time?
It is under examination because one of the major imports, wherever they are coming from, some of them are not covered in FTAs.
Let me open up this dialogue to a larger issue which impacts everyone on this panel and across sectors, and I'll start by asking you, Steel Secretary, privatization and disinvestment. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of speculation around whether RINL will be up for privatization or disinvestment, NMDC at some point will be up for privatization and disinvestment. I don't want you to necessarily talk about any specific cases, but do you believe that there is a case today for disinvestment or privatization of public sector holdings within the steel sector? And then I'll go around the rest of the panel for their view.
Yeah, so if you say in general whether there is a case, yes, there is a case for at least some of the plants which are not doing well. You mentioned RINL. RINL is in deep financial crisis. So that's I think, and there's a 21 cabinet decision which says that RINL will be disinvestment. Then there are practical constraints on this investments because of which it is not happening right now. But on a principal basis, yes, some of the public sector units which are not doing well, I think if they are disinvested, fresh private sector investment will come and both efficiencies will come. Whether RINL will be disinvestment immediately, there are issues on that.
But is this something that your ministry will push, at least as far as your sector is concerned, as far as the steel sector is concerned? Because as you said, you require significant amount of capital to come in, and that capital is likely to come in only from very few private sector players who have expressed interest already.
So basically we should also look at that fact that out of the 180 million tons of capacity in India, we have only about 30 million ton which is from public sector. So 150 million ton is already private sector. So it's not as if this sector is dominated by public sector. Having said that, some of that 30 million ton is not well run. So there is a case for disinvestment of that capacity at least. But private sector investment will have to come whether disinvestment is there or not if we want to have 300 million ton by.
Absolutely, to achieve that capacity target. Ms. Shah, let me address the demand issue with you as well as the FDI issue with you, and ask you this in the backdrop of the challenges that Bangladesh is faced with, because that has taken a significant share of global textile trade. And the likelihood of some of that moving to India, what's your own expectation and assessment?
Thank you, and at the outset, let me thank FICCI, and this is a great opportunity, of course, for interacting with the captains of industry. The demand insofar as textile sector is concerned, presently the size of the sector is about $170 billion, which is, something like 14.35 lakh crore. The domestic demand is robust and growing. We have a large domestic market, and with increase in disposable incomes, textile sector is one which will certainly be seeing growth. Our target is to increase the size of the sector from about $170 billion to $350 billion by 2030. And we are looking at a much larger share of the global, export pie, as it were. Presently, we are exporting something like $38 to $40 billion of, textile products. And within the $350 billion of output, we are looking at $100 billion of export. So which means that the share, which is currently around 4% of the global export, we are looking at a much larger share of the pie. And as I said, the domestic demand has been fairly robust and should continue to be. It is the global trade in textiles for the last couple of years, 2 years specifically, after we had a historical high of exports in 21-22 when we touched $44 billion US dollars, and thereafter 2 years have been slightly dull on account of certain geopolitical events, and also on account of the inventory build-up in 21-22. But we are now seeing positive signs in terms of growth in the export sector as well. And in the month-on-month kind of estimates which have recently come out, especially in the apparel sector, we are seeing a growth of almost 35%, and overall for this textile sector of 7 to 8% as compared to last year. So these are positive signs. And we are wanting to textile sector. India has a unique sort of a position because we have the entire textile value chain present in the country, which is rare, and apart from a few other countries, it's there in India, right from fiber to fabric to the entire processing chain, apparel, garments, technical textile, fashion. So I think we come with a position of strength that way, and I would like to think that further investment and export opportunities will come India's way based on our own strength in the textile value chain. The geopolitical events and events in Bangladesh would certainly have some bearing, whether it would translate more perhaps in the medium to long term, when our own capacities are also getting strengthened through some of the key initiatives that have been undertaken by the government, so that we have more large scale and size of manufacturing and world class textile infrastructure which gets established, and some of the the bigger brands, the international brands, they are already working with us, but they are looking perhaps to increasing their share over a period of time. So we do see these things happening as we go ahead. Insofar as FDI is concerned, we are looking at huge investment coming into the textile sector. And while the domestic industry and the major players will certainly play a very important role in that, we certainly are looking at more and more international players coming into the textile sector as well. The FDI in last, since 2000 has been something like $4.5 billion. So international players are there and they're coming, but certainly we are looking at a much larger share. And I think they are also looking at the domestic market, which is large and growing, and manufacturing in India for the domestic market and manufacturing in India for the export market is something that I'm sure is likely to attract the foreign players.